It had taken months of planning to create the perfect anniversary celebration. Our 15th year together deserved something extraordinary, so I'd rented out the rooftop garden of the Grand Meridian Hotel, the place where we'd had our first date. I'd arranged for Daniel's favorite band to play, hired his favorite chef to cater, and invited 60 of our closest friends and family. The evening was supposed to be the moment I surprised him with the European vacation I'd been secretly saving for over the past 2 years. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from, and if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow I've saved something extra special for you. I never imagined it would be the night he would stand before our loved ones, champagne glass in hand, and announce he was filing for divorce. The planning began in January, almost 6 months before our June anniversary. Daniel had been distant lately, working late hours at his law firm and traveling frequently for cases. I convinced myself that this celebration would rekindle the spark between us, remind him of why we fell in love all those years ago. He's just stressed, my sister Katie would assure me during our weekly coffee dates. The Montgomery case is huge for his career. I nodded along, but deep down, a nagging feeling persisted. The subtle changes in his behavior, the way his phone would go silent whenever I entered the room, how he'd stopped looking me in the eye during conversations, the growing coldness in his touch, these weren't just signs of work stress. Still, I pushed those doubts aside and channeled my energy into creating the perfect anniversary celebration. The Grand Meridian Hotel wasn't just any venue. It was where Daniel had first approached me, his confidence slightly shaken as he'd stumbled over offering to buy me a drink. The rooftop garden offered breathtaking views of the city skyline, with string lights creating a magical ceiling of stars. I wanted to recreate that magic 15 years later. I coordinated with the hotel's event manager, Elise, for weeks. I'd booked the Ravensdowns, the indie band we'd seen on our third date. Finding them and convincing them to play had cost a small fortune, but I knew it would be worth it to see the look on his face. The catering was another personal touch. Chef Marcus had once prepared a meal so memorable for us on our 5th anniversary that Daniel had mentioned it at least once a year since. As the date approached, I threw myself into the final details. The custom-engraved watches I'd ordered arrived 3 weeks before the party. The travel documents for our surprise trip to Italy, Greece, and France were neatly organized in a leather portfolio, ready to be presented at the height of the evening's celebration. The day before the event, I visited the venue for a final walkthrough. The space was beginning to transform. Workers setting up elegant round tables draped in midnight blue linens, Daniel's favorite color. Florists arranged centerpieces of white hydrangeas and blue delphiniums. On the morning of our anniversary, I woke up early. Daniel was still asleep, his back turned to me as it had been for months now. I watched him for a moment, studying the curve of his shoulder, the rhythm of his breathing. 15 years together, and sometimes I felt like I was living with a stranger. Hours later, I stood in our bedroom, applying the finishing touches to my makeup. I'd chosen a deep blue gown, custom-made to fit perfectly. The sapphire earrings Daniel had given me on our 10th anniversary complemented the dress beautifully. Daniel had been oddly calm all day, almost detached. When I reminded him we needed to leave by 7, he'd simply nodded and continued typing on his laptop. No mention of our anniversary, no card, no flowers. The drive to the hotel was silent, the space between us filled with unspoken words. I clutched my purse, inside which was the portfolio containing our European adventure. Despite the growing knot in my stomach, I convinced myself that the evening would go as planned. Once he saw the venue, the band, all our friends gathered to celebrate us. Surely then the Daniel I knew would return. Daniel and I met during the summer of 2008. I was working as an event coordinator at the Grand Meridian Hotel, orchestrating elegant weddings and corporate functions. He was a rising associate at Harrington and Price, ambitious and charismatic, attending a pharmaceutical company's fundraiser I had organized. Our romance moved quickly, perhaps too quickly, as my mother had gently suggested. Within 6 months, we were engaged, and by the following summer, we were exchanging vows in the same rooftop garden where we'd first locked eyes. Everyone said we were perfect together, the detail-oriented planner and the strategic lawyer, both ambitious, both driven to create a beautiful life. The early years of our marriage were everything I'd hoped for. We purchased a Victorian brownstone in the historic district and spent weekends restoring its original features. Daniel's career flourished, and I eventually left the hotel to start my own event planning business. We talked about having children, but always decided to wait just another year until our careers were more established. The first real crack appeared in our 8th year of marriage. Daniel's father, Richard, passed away unexpectedly from a heart attack. Richard had been the senior partner at the law firm where Daniel worked, a towering figure in the legal community and Daniel's personal hero. His death shattered Daniel in ways I wasn't prepared for. "I need to step up now," Daniel told me late one night. "Dad built that firm from nothing. I can't let his legacy fade." The late nights at the office began then. Dinners missed, weekends sacrificed, vacations postponed. I supported him without question, believing it was temporary, that once he felt secure in his new role at the firm, he would return to me. By our 10th anniversary, we had settled into a new normal. Daniel worked 60-hour weeks while I grew my business and maintained our social calendar. We still had moments of genuine connection, the surprise sapphire earrings he gave me on our 10th anniversary, the weekend trip to the wine country, but they became islands in an increasingly wide sea of separate lives. Eleanor, Daniel's mother, became my unlikely confidant during those years. After Richard's death, she and I grew closer than ever. Where, once she had been reserved and proper, grief softened her edges. We began having weekly lunches, and she often invited me to accompany her to charity events when Daniel was too busy to attend. "Marriage is a long game, Caroline," she would tell me. Richard was the same way after he made partner. Men like them, brilliant, ambitious, they need space to fulfill their potential. But they always come home. What I couldn't explain away were the other changes. The separate vacations that began as a practical solution to his busy schedule, but evolved into a habit. The separate bedrooms that started during a week when he was preparing for a major trial, but somehow became permanent. The growing silence at our dinner table. 3 months before our 15th anniversary, Eleanor was diagnosed with stage 4 pancreatic cancer. The prognosis was grim, 6 months at most. I expected this news to shake Daniel out of his work-obsessed stupor. Instead, he retreated further, burying himself in cases. I stepped in, taking Eleanor to her appointments, managing her medications, and spending long afternoons by her side. "He's just like Richard," she would say, making excuses for her son's absence. They never knew how to face the difficult things. One afternoon, as I helped Eleanor organize her personal papers, she handed me an envelope. "For safekeeping," she said, her hands trembling. "This contains my updated will and some letters. Promise me you'll make sure everything is handled according to my wishes." 2 weeks before our anniversary, Eleanor passed away peacefully in her sleep. Daniel stood stoic at the funeral, accepting condolences with detached professionalism. The reading of Eleanor's will was scheduled for the week after our anniversary. In my grief and mounting frustration, I threw myself into planning our anniversary celebration with even greater determination, convinced that creating a perfect evening might finally break through the walls he had built. The week before our anniversary, celebration became a blur of final confirmations and last-minute details. I was determined to create not just a party, but a turning point for our marriage, a night so perfect that Daniel would have no choice but to remember why we had fallen in love. Preparing and narrating this story took us a lot of time, So if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel. It means a lot to us. Now back to the story. The European vacation package had been the most challenging element to arrange. Daniel's schedule was notoriously unpredictable, and getting him away from work for 3 weeks would be nearly impossible under normal circumstances. But I had thought of everything. I'd spoken with Margaret, the senior partner who had taken over much of Richard's role at the firm, explaining my surprise and asking for her help in clearing Daniel's schedule. "He needs this," I had told her over coffee. "After losing Eleanor, he's not coping well." Margaret had been understanding, even enthusiastic. "Leave it to me. I'll make sure nothing critical lands on his desk during those weeks. God knows he's earned a break." With Margaret's cooperation secured, I'd spent countless evenings researching the perfect itinerary. Daniel had always talked about walking the ancient streets of Rome, exploring the Greek islands, and sipping wine in French countryside vineyards. I planned a journey that would hit all these dreams while still leaving room for spontaneity. I worked with a luxury travel consultant to book boutique hotels in each location. Not the standard tourist accommodations, but hidden gems with character and history. In Rome, I'd secured a suite in a converted palazzo owned by a count who had attended law school with Daniel's father. In Santorini, we would stay in a cliffside villa with a private pool overlooking the caldera. In Provence, I'd arranged for a week in a restored farmhouse surrounded by lavender fields, with a renowned local chef for private cooking lessons. The cost had been considerable, requiring me to dip into my personal savings and take on additional clients over the past 2 years. I'd worked through weekends and holidays, often leaving the house before Daniel woke and returning after he'd gone to bed. For our anniversary gifts, I'd been equally thoughtful. The matching watches were from the same Swiss manufacturer that had created the timepiece Daniel's father had given him upon making partner. I'd worked with their design team to incorporate elements that had personal meaning: the coordinates of the Grand Meridian Hotel engraved on the back, the date of our wedding etched inside the band, and a small sapphire at the 12 o'clock position. But the most meaningful gift wasn't material at all. I'd spent months collecting video messages from friends, family, and colleagues who had been part of our journey together. College roommates reminiscing about how nervous Daniel had been before our first date. Colleagues sharing stories of how he'd mentioned my name in every conversation during the early days of our relationship. I'd edited these messages together into a beautiful tribute to our 15 years, planning to play it at the height of the evening. Even as I coordinated these elements, I was also helping to finalize Eleanor's funeral arrangements and managing my own grief. Daniel had delegated most of the decisions to me, claiming he needed to handle her legal affairs. I chose the flowers, lilies, her favorite, selected readings that reflected her elegant personality, and spent hours creating a photo montage of her life for the service, all while keeping my anniversary plans on track. The morning of our anniversary, after Daniel left for his early meeting, I made one final call to Elise at the Grand Meridian. "Is everything ready for tonight?" "Absolutely," she assured me. The band arrived an hour ago for sound check. Chef Marcus is already working his magic in the kitchen. The florist just finished, and it looks stunning. As I prepared to get ready, my phone chimed with a message from Katie. "Everything is ready on my end. The photographer will be in position when you arrive. Can't wait to see Daniel's face when you surprise him with the trip." As warm water washed over me, I allowed myself to imagine Daniel's reaction to the evening I'd planned. In that moment, standing under the shower, I truly believed that my extraordinary efforts would be enough to save us. I had no idea that in just a few hours, Daniel would be the one with a surprise announcement. As we stepped off the elevator onto the rooftop of the Grand Meridian, I held my breath, watching Daniel's face for his reaction. The transformation of the space was truly magical. String lights created a canopy of stars above the lush greenery. Candles flickered on tables draped in midnight blue, and the city skyline provided a dazzling backdrop. for a brief, beautiful moment. I saw something flicker in Daniel's eyes, a flash of the man I'd fallen in love with 15 years ago. His lips parted slightly, and his grip on my hand tightened just enough for me to notice. "Caroline," he breathed, taking in the scene. "This is—" Before he could finish, our guests noticed our arrival. A chorus of "surprise" and "happy anniversary" erupted as friends and family emerged from behind artfully arranged planters. Katie approached first, champagne flutes in hand. "You two deserve to be celebrated," she said, passing us each a glass. 15 years is no small achievement. Daniel accepted the champagne with a smile that didn't quite reach his eyes, but he played along, thanking our guests and accepting congratulations. Still, he was making an effort, and that gave me hope. The band began playing softly, the Ravensdowns, starting with the same song that had been playing when Daniel first approached me in this very spot. When the first notes drifted across the rooftop, Daniel turned to me, recognition evident in his expression. "You remembered," he said quietly. "I remember everything about us," I replied, allowing myself to feel the first flutter of hope. The next hour passed in a blur of congratulations, champagne toasts, and shared memories. Daniel remained by my side, his hand occasionally resting on the small of my back, a gesture so familiar yet so long absent that each touch sent a current of hope through me. He laughed at the right moments and even shared a few anecdotes from our early days together. When Chef Marcus announced dinner was served, Daniel pulled out my chair, a courtesy he hadn't extended in years. As we settled at the head table, surrounded by our closest friends, he even asked me about my week, listening with apparent interest. As I described a challenging client meeting, the meal was everything I had hoped for, each course triggering memories of meals we had shared over the years. The lobster bisque from our first anniversary dinner, the truffle risotto from the night Daniel made partner, the chocolate soufflé that had become our tradition on birthdays and special occasions. As we finished dessert, Daniel leaned close, his breath warm against my ear. "You've gone to a lot of trouble for tonight." "It's worth it," I said, feeling a surge of confidence. "You're worth it. We're worth it." He studied my face for a long moment, and I thought I glimpsed something like regret in his eyes. But then, he nodded, squeezing my hand before releasing it. The moment felt significant. A silent acknowledgement of the effort I had made. Perhaps even a recognition of how far we had drifted, and a willingness to find our way back. I signaled to Elise, who dimmed the lights slightly as waiters refreshed everyone's champagne. This was it, the perfect moment to present Daniel with the first of my surprises. Katie appeared at my side, handing me an elegantly wrapped box containing the watches. As conversation around us quieted in anticipation, I turned to Daniel, my heart racing with renewed optimism. 15 years ago, I married my best friend, I began, loud enough for our guests to hear. The most brilliant, dedicated man I've ever known. Murmurs of approval rippled through the crowd. We've built a life together that I'm proud of every day, even when that life takes unexpected turns. Daniel's expression remained neutral, but he maintained eye contact, a promising sign. "This gift is just a small token of my appreciation for the journey we've shared," I continued, sliding the package across the table toward him, "and for all the adventures still to come." He accepted the box, his fingers brushing mine. With deliberate care, he unwrapped it, lifting the lid to reveal the 2 watches. For a breathless moment, I thought I saw his eyes grow damp. "They're beautiful, Caroline," he said, his voice steady but sincere. "Thank you." He leaned forward and placed a light kiss on my cheek, the first voluntary show of affection in months. My skin tingled where his lips had touched, and I felt a rush of emotion so powerful I had to blink back tears. As the band shifted to a slower song, Daniel stood and extended his hand. "Would you dance with me?" he asked. I took his hand, allowing him to lead me to the small dance floor we had created among the tables. As his arm circled my waist and he drew me close, I inhaled the familiar scent of his cologne. My body remembered his, falling naturally into the rhythm we had perfected over years of wedding receptions and charity galas. "Do you remember the first time we danced here?" I asked, looking up at him. He nodded, his expression softening. "You were wearing a red dress. I kept stepping on your feet." When the song ended, Daniel kept hold of my hand as we returned to our table. Before sitting, he reached for his champagne glass and gently tapped it with a knife, the crystal chime cutting through the ambient noise. Conversations quieted as heads turned toward us. "I'd like to say a few words," he announced, his voice carrying across the rooftop. "I want to thank everyone for coming tonight," Daniel began, his lawyer's voice, confident, measured, persuasive, filling the space. "It means a great deal to see so many faces from different chapters of our lives." I beamed up at him, my hope building with each word. "Caroline has, as always, created a perfect evening. Her attention to detail and her generosity of spirit are unmatched." He gestured around the beautifully decorated rooftop. "This celebration is a testament to who she is: thoughtful, dedicated, and extraordinarily kind." Murmurs of agreement rippled through the crowd, and I felt a flush of pleasure at his praise. "Which makes what I'm about to say all the more difficult," he continued, his voice dropping slightly. A chill ran through me, sudden and sharp as a winter wind. Daniel took a deep breath, his gaze sweeping over our gathered guests before returning to me. "Caroline and I have reached a crossroads in our journey together." The rooftop went silent. Even the background music seemed to fade away. "After 15 years of marriage and careful consideration," he said, each word precise and measured, "I've filed for divorce." Time stopped. The champagne glass nearly slipped from my fingers as the world around me blurred. This couldn't be happening. Not here. Not now. Not in front of everyone we knew. Yet as I stared up at my husband, at the determined set of his jaw and the finality in his eyes, I knew it was real. The evening I had planned so meticulously as a renewal was instead becoming a very public ending. "I know this comes as a shock," Daniel continued, his lawyer voice steady and controlled. "But I believe in transparency, and I didn't want to continue this charade any longer." Charade? The word cut through me like a knife. Had that been all our marriage was to him? A performance for the benefit of others? "Caroline and I have grown in different directions," he explained to our stunned audience. "We want different things from life now. And while I deeply respect everything she has contributed to our years together, it's time for both of us to move forward separately." He spoke about me as if I weren't standing right beside him, as if this were a decision we had reached together rather than a bomb he had detonated in the middle of the celebration I had spent months planning. "I've arranged for Caroline to retain the brownstone," Daniel added, as if this generosity somehow balanced the scales of his betrayal. "The paperwork is being processed, and my attorney will be in touch with hers to facilitate a smooth transition." His attorney, my attorney, these cold clinical terms for the dismantling of 15 years together. "I'd like to request privacy during this difficult time," Daniel concluded, as if he hadn't just broadcast our most intimate failure to everyone we knew. "And I hope you'll continue to support both Caroline and me as we navigate this transition." With that, he placed his champagne glass on the table, the gesture so casual it seemed obscene in its normalcy. He turned toward me, finally acknowledging my presence with a look that contained something like pity. "I'm sorry," he said quietly, "for my ears only. But it's better this way. Clean. Decisive." "Better for whom?" I wanted to scream, but no words came. Daniel straightened his tie, the one I had selected to match my dress, and addressed our guests once more. "Please, enjoy the rest of the evening. The food and music are exceptional, as Caroline always ensures. And then, with the practiced ease of a man accustomed to delivering difficult news and moving on, he began walking toward the exit, pausing only to shake a few hands and exchange brief words with those directly in his path. The paralysis that had gripped me began to crack. "Daniel," I called, my voice emerging strangled and foreign to my own ears. "Daniel!" He paused at the edge of the rooftop, near the elevator banks, and turned back to face me. 60 heads swiveled in unison, watching this macabre theater unfold. "How? Could you?" I asked, the words barely audible as I struggled to push them past the tightness in my throat. Even from a distance, I could see the slight shift in his posture, shoulders squaring, chin lifting. His courtroom stance. "It was the only way," he replied, loud enough for those nearest to hear. "You wouldn't have accepted it otherwise." Before I could respond, the elevator doors opened behind him, and with perfect timing, as if the universe itself were conspiring in his dramatic exit, he stepped inside and was gone. The moment he disappeared, chaos erupted. Katie rushed to my side, wrapping a protective arm around my shoulders. Friends converged, voices overlapping in a cacophony of concern and outrage. "Did you know? How could he? Are you okay?" And I still had the European itinerary tucked away in my purse, waiting for a moment of celebration that would never come. The days following the anniversary party passed in a fog of shock and disbelief. I moved through our home, my home now, according to Daniel, like a stranger, touching familiar objects that suddenly seemed to belong to someone else's life. The coffee mug with my initial that had sat beside his matching one for 15 years. The throw pillows we had argued about. The framed photos from happier times that now felt like elaborate fictions. Sleep eluded me entirely the first night, and came only in fitful bursts in the days that followed. When I did manage to close my eyes, I would jolt awake to the echo of Daniel's voice saying, "I filed for divorce," the words reverberating through my subconscious like a recurring nightmare. The physical symptoms of devastation manifested with alarming intensity. My appetite vanished completely. My hands trembled constantly. A persistent pressure sat on my chest, as if someone had placed a stone there while I slept and forgotten to remove it. I found myself gasping for air at random moments, in the shower, while brewing coffee, as I stared blankly at the television. My phone buzzed incessantly with messages from concerned friends and family. I responded to Katie's texts with brief assurances that I was still breathing, but otherwise let the digital pile of sympathy and outrage grow unchecked. On the third morning, I forced myself to shower and dress, if only to prove I was still capable of basic human functions. As I mindlessly sorted through the mail, my finger caught on the edge of a heavy cream envelope. The return address belonged to Winston & Hayes, the law firm that had handled Eleanor's legal affairs for decades. Inside was a formal reminder of the will reading scheduled for the following day. A handwritten note was paper-clipped to the printed letter, "Caroline, your presence is essential." Eleanor was most insistent. Samuel Winston, I traced my finger over the words. Something about their urgency cutting through the haze that had enveloped me since the party. Eleanor had been insistent about my attendance. What final message might she have for me? For the first time since Daniel's announcement, I felt a flicker of something other than despair, a small spark of curiosity, perhaps even purpose. That afternoon, my phone rang with a number I didn't recognize. After a moment's hesitation, I answered. "Caroline." "Mitchell?" A woman's crisp, professional voice came through the line. "Yes, speaking." "This is Veronica Slater from Blackwell & Associates. I'm calling regarding the dissolution of your marriage to Daniel Mitchell." My hand tightened around the phone. "You're his lawyer?" "Yes," she confirmed. "I've been instructed to discuss the preliminary terms of the separation agreement with you. Daniel mentioned you might not have secured representation yet." The presumption in her tone, The assumption that I would be unprepared, passive in the face of Daniel's efficiency, sent an unexpected surge of anger through me. It was the first strong emotion I had felt since the numbness had set in, and it cut through the fog like a blade. "Actually, Miss Slater," I replied, my voice steadier than it had been in days, "I'll be represented by Gregory Palmer. You can direct all communication through his office." The lie came easily, surprising me. Gregory had been Richard's attorney, and though I had never personally engaged his services, I knew him well enough to make the claim credible. After hanging up, I immediately dialed Gregory's office, securing an appointment for later that afternoon. The burst of energy that followed this small act of self-advocacy propelled me to shower again, to blow dry my hair, to put on actual clothes rather than the comfort wear I had been living in. As I examined myself in the bathroom mirror, I barely recognized the woman staring back at me. She looked composed on the surface, but her eyes held a vulnerability that no amount of concealer could disguise. Still, she was presentable, professional, ready to begin the business of dismantling a 15-year marriage with whatever dignity she could salvage. Gregory Palmer's office occupied the top floor of a sleek downtown building. The receptionist led me to a corner office with floor-to-ceiling windows overlooking the city. Gregory rose from behind his imposing desk when I entered, extending his hand with a sympathy that was evident but not cloying. "I've been better," I admitted to his gentle inquiry, taking the seat he offered. "But I'm here to move forward." He nodded, understanding the subtext. We weren't here to talk about my emotional state. We were here to protect my interests in what was rapidly becoming a business transaction, the liquidation of a shared life. "Daniel's attorney reached out to you already?" he asked, pulling a legal pad toward him. "Yes, today. A Veronica Slater from Blackwell." Gregory's eyebrows rose slightly. "Veronica is aggressive. Daniel's not wasting time bringing in the heavy artillery." My stomach clenched. "Should I be worried?" "Not with me in your corner," he assured me, though his expression remained serious. As I left the building and stepped into the late afternoon sunlight, I felt a strange duality setting in. On one level, the professional consultation had given me a focus, a path forward through the practical aspects of untangling my life from Daniel's. But beneath that thin veneer of competence, the emotional earthquake continued to shake my foundation. That evening, I noticed Daniel's legal pad beside the phone, where he often jotted notes during work calls. His familiar handwriting caught my eye, a phone number with the name Veronica beside it, dated 3 weeks earlier. 3 weeks. He had contacted his divorce attorney 3 weeks before our anniversary party. While I was finalizing the guest list and confirming the menu, he was planning his exit strategy. The glass slipped from my hand, shattering against the tile floor. Red wine splashed across the white surface like blood from a wound. As I knelt to clean up the broken glass, a shard caught my finger, drawing a thin line of blood. The sharp pain was almost a relief, something tangible, something physical to match the invisible wounds I'd been carrying. I watched the drop of blood well up on my fingertip, bright and real against my pale skin. In that moment, something inside me shifted. The numbness that had been my constant companion began to recede, replaced by a slow-building anger that felt almost like strength. Daniel had orchestrated my public humiliation with the same careful planning I had devoted to celebrating our marriage. Tomorrow, at Eleanor's will reading, I would face him for the first time since he walked off that rooftop. And I would not be the shattered woman he expected to find. The offices of Winston and Hayes occupied a historic brownstone, not unlike the one Daniel and I had shared. I had dressed with deliberate care for this encounter, a tailored charcoal suit that Eleanor had helped me select years ago, pearls she had given me on my 30th birthday, and subtle makeup that concealed the evidence of sleepless nights. My hair was pulled back in a sleek chignon, not a strand out of place. If I couldn't control the chaos inside me, at least I could present a composed exterior to the world and to Daniel. The receptionist led me to a conference room on the second floor. Samuel Winston, Eleanor's longtime attorney and friend, sat at the head of the table. Margaret Harrington, the senior partner who had worked with Daniel's father, sat to his right. Two other people I didn't recognize sat opposite them, and there, at the far end of the table, was Daniel. He looked up as I entered, and for the briefest moment, surprise flickered across his face. Perhaps he had expected me to be visibly broken, to arrive as the emotional wreck he had left standing on that rooftop. Instead, he faced a woman who appeared every bit as composed as he was. "Caroline," Samuel greeted me. "Thank you for coming. Eleanor would be pleased." I moved to the chair with measured steps, feeling Daniel's eyes on me the entire way. When I sat down, I met his gaze directly for the first time since the party. His expression was carefully neutral, but I caught the subtle tightening around his eyes, the slight clench of his jaw. After introductions were complete, Samuel cleared his throat and opened the leather portfolio in front of him. "We're gathered today to fulfill Eleanor Mitchell's final wishes as outlined in her last will and testament." Eleanor was very specific about how she wanted this handled. As Samuel read through standard bequests, I maintained my focus on him, though I was acutely aware of Daniel's presence across the table. When he mentioned a collection of first-edition books that Eleanor was leaving to me, books we had often discussed during our weekly lunches, I offered a small, gracious smile and a quiet, "Thank you." "Now, to the matter of Eleanor's primary assets," Samuel continued, his tone shifting slightly. "Eleanor made substantial changes to her will in the final months of her life. These changes were executed when she was of sound mind, with myself and two other attorneys as witnesses." Daniel shifted in his seat, and I caught the flash of interest in his eyes. "The Mitchell family home in Westchester and its contents are to be placed in a trust," Samuel read. "This trust will be administered by Caroline Mitchell, to be maintained as a residence for Eleanor's grandchildren, should Daniel and Caroline have children in the future, or to be sold at Caroline's discretion if no children are born within 5 years of Eleanor's passing." I felt a jolt of surprise. Eleanor had left her beloved family home in my control, not Daniel's. "Additionally," Samuel continued, "Eleanor's financial assets, including investment portfolios, bank accounts, and insurance policies totaling approximately $12 million, are to be divided as follows: $1 million to various charities. As previously outlined, $1 million to be held in trust for potential future grandchildren, and the remaining $10 million to be placed in a trust with Caroline Mitchell as the sole beneficiary and trustee." The room went completely still. $10 million. To me, not to Daniel, her only child. To me. "This can't be right." Daniel's voice cut through the silence, tight with barely controlled outrage. "There must be some mistake." "Eleanor anticipated your objection," Samuel replied. "She included a letter to be read in the event that you challenged her decisions." He withdrew a sealed envelope and broke the wax seal that bore Eleanor's monogram. "My dear son," Samuel read. "If Samuel is reading this letter, it means you are challenging my decisions regarding my estate. This grieves but does not surprise me. You have become so much like your father in ways that break my heart. Brilliant but cold, successful but disconnected from what truly matters." Daniel's face paled slightly, but his expression remained defiant. "I have watched you pull away from Caroline, a woman who has shown more loyalty to our family than you have shown to her in recent years. I have watched you become consumed by the same ambition that eventually hollowed out your father, leaving him a successful man who died without true connection." The letter continued. Eleanor's words painting a picture of a son who had lost his way, who had prioritized professional success over personal relationships, who had taken for granted the woman who stood by him through the loss of his father and the illness of his mother. "Caroline was the daughter I never had," Samuel read. "When I needed someone in my final months, it was Caroline who arranged my care, who sat with me through treatments, who made sure my affairs were in order while you buried yourself in work. It is Caroline who deserves to benefit from what Richard and I built because she understands what we too often forgot, that wealth without love is merely currency, not legacy. As the letter's contents unfolded, I maintained my composure, though each word struck me with surprising force. Eleanor had seen everything: my efforts, my loneliness, my unwavering commitment to a marriage that had been slowly dying for years. "If you contest this will," Samuel concluded, "all assets will go directly to the charities listed in the appendix, with nothing remaining for either you or Caroline. This is not spite, my son, but a final lesson from a mother who loves you. Some things, once broken, cannot be repaired with money or legal maneuvers. They require humility, honesty, and heart." Samuel refolded the letter and placed it back in his portfolio. The silence that followed was absolute. "Is there anything else, Samuel?" I asked, my voice steady and clear in the silent room. He gave us each personal letters from Eleanor, to be read privately. Daniel stared at his envelope without touching it, but I accepted mine with a graceful nod of thanks. As the room emptied, I finally spoke directly to my husband. "Daniel, I think we should discuss this privately." "There's nothing to discuss," he replied. "I'll be contesting the will." As Eleanor's letter indicated, contesting will trigger the charitable remainder clause, Samuel reminded him. "You'd be fighting for nothing." As I reached the door, I paused and turned back. "Oh, and Daniel, Gregory Palmer will be in touch with Ms. Slater regarding the divorce proceedings. I think you'll find I'm not quite as unprepared as you assumed I would be." The look of genuine shock on his face as I closed the door behind me was the first moment of satisfaction I had felt since our anniversary party. It wasn't triumph exactly, but something quieter and more powerful: the recognition of my own resilience. The morning after the will reading, I woke with a clarity I hadn't felt in years. The paralysis of shock had lifted, replaced by a calm determination that felt both foreign and familiar, like rediscovering a part of myself that had been dormant during my marriage. I made coffee and carried it to my home office, settling at the desk that had primarily been used for planning dinner parties and holiday celebrations. Today, it would serve a different purpose. I opened my laptop and created a new document titled Next Steps, then began to type with methodical precision. I outlined a complete financial inventory, professional priorities for my event planning, business and personal goals moving forward. I was halfway through when my phone rang. Daniel's name flashed on the screen. "We need to talk," he said without preamble, his voice tight with controlled anger. I suggested Crawford's, a small cafe near his office, public enough to discourage a scene, but quiet enough for a private conversation. I arrived 15 minutes early, selecting a corner table with a view of the entrance. Daniel entered precisely at 1 o'clock, scanning the room before spotting me. He looked tired, shadows under his eyes suggesting sleepless nights, his usually impeccable appearance slightly rumpled around the edges. "You need to talk to my mother's attorney," he said, diving directly into his agenda. "This will situation is unacceptable." "I've already spoken with Samuel," I replied calmly. "The will is legally sound." She wasn't thinking clearly. She was ill, on medication. She was perfectly lucid. The will was executed months before her condition deteriorated, with multiple witnesses present. Daniel's jaw tightened. "So, that's it? You're going to take my mother's money and walk away?" The accusation was so brazen, so divorced from reality, that I felt a flash of genuine amusement. "That's an interesting interpretation of events, Daniel. I wasn't the one who announced divorce at an anniversary party. I wasn't the one who contacted a lawyer weeks before making that announcement. And I certainly wasn't the one who walked away." He had the grace to look momentarily abashed, but recovered quickly. The timing was unfortunate, but the outcome would have been the same. The outcome, perhaps. The method was entirely your choice. "What do you want, Caroline? Is this about money?" Because we can negotiate a fair settlement without bringing my mother's estate into it. I studied him, this man I had loved for 15 years, now sizing me up like an opponent in court. What I want is to understand why you chose to end our marriage in the most public, humiliating way possible. What I want is to know when you decided our relationship was beyond saving. What I want is the truth, Daniel, not more legal maneuvering. He sat back, seemingly caught off guard by my directness. For a moment, the polished attorney facade slipped, revealing flashes of the man I had married, uncertain, vulnerable, human. It wasn't planned that way, he admitted finally. I had intended to tell you privately after the party, but sitting there, watching you create this perfect celebration for a marriage that was already over in my mind, it felt like another lie in a long series of pretenses. So I ended it by ambushing me in front of everyone we know. I'm not proud of how I handled it, yet you're not apologizing either. His coffee arrived and he stirred it unnecessarily, avoiding my gaze. Would an apology change anything? No, I conceded. But it would demonstrate that you recognize the cruelty of your actions. Daniel sighed. I'm sorry for how I handled it. You didn't deserve that. I reached into my purse and withdrew a slim manila envelope, placing it on the table between us. I wanted to give you this in person. Daniel eyed the envelope warily. What is it? The European itinerary. I had planned a 3-week trip through Italy, Greece, and France as an anniversary surprise. The tickets are non-refundable, but fully transferable. I thought you might want to use them. His expression shifted from suspicion to genuine surprise. You're giving me our anniversary trip? It was meant to be a gift, I said simply. That hasn't changed, even if everything else has. As I turned to leave, Daniel called after me. Caroline, wait, about my mother's estate. I paused, looking back at him. We can discuss Eleanor's will another time. For now, I suggest you read her letter again. Really read it. She wasn't punishing you, Daniel. She was trying to wake you up. With that, I walked out of Crawford's, my steps light despite the heaviness of the conversation. The European itinerary had been weighing on me, a painful reminder of hope misplaced, of plans carefully made for a future that would never arrive. Handing it to Daniel wasn't generosity. It was unburdening myself of expectations that no longer served me. As I hailed a taxi, my phone buzzed with a text from Gregory. Slater reached out. They want to schedule mediation next week. Your thoughts? I smiled slightly, typing a response. Tell them I'm available Tuesday afternoon. And Gregory? No rush. Tuesday arrived, bringing with it our first mediation session at Gregory's office. I dressed with care, a navy suit that conveyed seriousness without severity, minimal jewelry, hair pulled back in a simple style. Professional, composed, but not trying too hard. What struck me immediately was the change in Daniel. The confidence that had always defined him seemed diminished, replaced by a tightly controlled tension. When our eyes met briefly, I saw something I had never expected. Uncertainty. The session began with asset disclosure, both sides presenting inventories of what we owned jointly and separately. Veronica was meticulous and aggressive, challenging several valuations and emphasizing Daniel's contributions to our shared wealth. Gregory remained calm, presenting our side with quiet authority. When the mediator called for a short break, Daniel surprised me by approaching as I poured coffee from the sideboard. You seem different, he said quietly. I stirred cream into my cup. I am different. Because of my mother's money? The question revealed so much about how little he understood what had happened, not just with Eleanor's will, but with our marriage, with the person I had become in the aftermath of his public rejection. No, Daniel, I replied, meeting his gaze, directly. Because of your choices and mine, the money is just a detail. As the mediation resumed, we moved from asset inventory to proposed division. Gregory presented our initial position. I would keep the brownstone and my business, Daniel would retain his partnership shares in the firm, and we would divide investment accounts proportionally. Veronica countered with a dramatically different proposal, one that would grant Daniel significant portions of assets that were clearly mine, including partial ownership of my business. Her justification, that Daniel's career had enabled my entrepreneurial venture, was both technically accurate and fundamentally misleading. My business exists despite Daniel's career, not because of it, I said, my voice steady but intensity building with each word. I built it during evenings when he worked late, weekends when he was at the office, holidays when cases took priority, over family time. I built it in the margins of a marriage that increasingly centered around his ambitions and his schedule. To suggest now that he deserves credit, financial or otherwise, for a company he barely acknowledged until it became profitable is not just unreasonable, it's revisionist history. The room fell silent. Even Veronica seemed momentarily at a loss for words. Daniel stared at me, something unreadable flickering across his face. Caroline, the mediator asked, what matters most to you in this process? Fairness and truth. I want a settlement that accurately reflects what we each contributed and what we each need going forward. But more than that, I want acknowledgement of reality, of how we got here, of the choices that led to this moment. And Daniel, what are your priorities? Efficiency, he said. A clean break with minimal conflict. A clean break, I repeated. Is that what you call announcing our divorce at our anniversary party? Was that your idea of minimal conflict? I've already apologized for the timing. You apologized for how you handled it, I corrected. You've never explained why. Why that night, Daniel? Why in front of everyone we know? Was it punishment? Calculation? What? It wasn't planned, he insisted. I just couldn't pretend anymore. Pretend what exactly? That you loved me? That our marriage mattered to you? Which part had become such an unbearable pretense? All of it, he said, his voice rising slightly. The dinners where we made small talk like strangers. The social events where we played the perfect couple. The constant planning and arranging and managing of a life I no longer wanted but didn't know how to leave. You didn't know how to leave? You're a divorce attorney's son. Your firm handles high profile divorces regularly. You knew exactly how to leave, Daniel. You chose the cruelest possible method. I chose the most honest method, he countered. After years of polite fictions and elaborate performances, yes, from both of us, I chose brutal honesty. There was nothing honest about it. Honesty would have been a private conversation months ago. Honesty would have been telling me you were unhappy before consulting divorce attorneys. Honesty would have been giving our marriage a chance instead of executing it publicly without warning. You want honesty, Caroline? Here's honesty. I watched you plan that party for months. The perfect venue, the perfect menu, the perfect guest list. Just like you've planned every moment of our lives together. And I realized I couldn't breathe anymore. I couldn't live up to the perfect husband role in the perfect life you had choreographed for us. His words hit me like physical blows. Each one revealing how fundamentally he had misunderstood my efforts, my intentions, my love for him. I wasn't choreographing a performance, Daniel, I said quietly. I was fighting for our marriage. Every dinner party, every weekend trip, every anniversary, celebration. They weren't about creating some artificial perfect life. They were attempts to keep us connected when you were drifting further away. Something flickered in his eyes. Recognition, perhaps, or the first hint of doubt about his narrative. After your father died, I continued, you retreated into work. I understood that grief takes different forms, so I created spaces where you might find your way back. When Eleanor got sick and you buried yourself even deeper in cases and clients, I stepped in, not just for her, But for you, everything I planned, everything I arranged, was an attempt to preserve what was slipping away between us. Daniel's expression shifted, the anger gradually replaced by something more complex, confusion, dawning awareness, perhaps even the beginning of regret. I didn't see it that way, he admitted, his voice lower now. I saw pressure, expectations I couldn't meet. I never asked for perfection, Daniel. I just wanted presence, participation, partnership. When did you decide it was over? I asked, needing to know when exactly I had lost him. He stared down at his hands. I don't know. There wasn't a single moment. It was gradual, then sudden, like going broke, I suppose. Or like falling in love, I suggested quietly. His eyes met mine, and for a brief moment, I glimpsed the man I had married. Thoughtful, perceptive, capable of genuine connection. Yes, he acknowledged. Like that too. As we prepared to leave, Daniel approached me once more. My mother saw it, he said abruptly. Everything you just described. That's what her letter was about. I nodded, understanding flowing between us. For perhaps the first time in years. She loved you, Daniel. She wanted more for you than what she and your father had. And what we had, he added softly. Yes, I agreed. What we had. The days following our mediation session brought subtle but significant changes. The morning after our confrontation, I received a brief email from Daniel. I've been thinking about our conversation yesterday. There were truths I needed to hear. Would you be willing to meet informally without attorneys to continue the discussion? I considered his request carefully. The emotional honesty of our mediation had cracked open, something long sealed between us. Not love, perhaps, but at least the possibility of understanding. After a day's reflection, I agreed to meet him that weekend at Eleanor's house in Westchester, neutral territory that belonged to neither of us yet was meaningful to both. The estate looked much as it always had, imposing but welcoming, surrounded by gardens Eleanor had tended with passion. Daniel was waiting on the front steps when I arrived, hands in his pockets, looking more casual than I had seen him in years in jeans and a simple sweater. Thank you for coming, he said, genuine gratitude in his voice. We walked the grounds in silence at first, following paths through gardens beginning to bloom with early summer flowers. When we reached Eleanor's favorite bench overlooking a small pond, we sat, maintaining a careful distance between us. I've been thinking about what you said, Daniel began, about fighting for our marriage while I retreated. You were right. His admission surprised me. Daniel rarely acknowledged being wrong about anything. After Dad died, work became sanctuary, he continued. A place where problems had solutions, where effort produced measurable results. The more I invested there, the less I knew how to be present anywhere else. I noticed, I said quietly. I know. But I didn't understand what you were doing in response. The dinners, the trips, the celebrations, I saw them as obligations, expectations I couldn't meet. I never recognized them as lifelines. The word hung between us. So accurate it made my chest ache. Why didn't you tell me you were drowning? I asked. Daniel stared out at the pond, considering. Pride, I suppose. Or fear that admitting unhappiness meant admitting failure. By the time I acknowledged it to myself, the distance felt unbridgeable. We sat with that truth, watching ripples spread across the water as a light breeze stirred the surface. I'm not asking for reconciliation, he clarified, perhaps misreading my silence. What I did at the anniversary party can't be undone. But I am asking for a different kind of ending than the one we've been headed toward. What does that mean? Less adversarial, more honest, honoring what was good between us, even as we acknowledge it's over. I studied his profile, this man I had loved for 15 years, now requesting a compassionate conclusion to our story rather than the bitter legal battle his attorney had been positioning for. The irony wasn't lost on me. Only after announcing our divorce in the cruelest possible way was he finally speaking to me with complete honesty. "I think I can do that," I said finally. "Not for your sake, but for mine. And for Eleanor's." He nodded, understanding the distinction. She would have appreciated that. As we walked back to our cars, a small but meaningful distance had been bridged. Not the chasm of our broken marriage, but at least the gap between truth and pretense that had defined our final years together. It wasn't forgiveness exactly, but perhaps the first step toward something equally important: acceptance. 2 years later. The autumn afternoon cast golden light across the terrace of Eleanor's Westchester estate, my estate now, though I still thought of it as hers. I adjusted the flowers on the outdoor dining table, a simple arrangement of seasonal blooms from the garden she had loved so deeply. The renovations I'd overseen had transformed the grand old house into something that honored its history, while serving a new purpose entirely. "The caterers just arrived," Katie called from the French doors. "They're setting up in the kitchen." Today marked the official opening of the Eleanor Mitchell Foundation, established with the inheritance that had so dramatically changed the trajectory of my life. After months of consideration, I had found my answer to the question of what Eleanor had intended with her surprising bequest: not just financial security for me, but the opportunity to create something meaningful from the ruins of what had been lost. The foundation would provide support for women rebuilding their lives after major life transitions: divorce, widowhood, career disruption. We would offer grants, mentorship, and practical resources, helping others navigate the journey I had been thrust into so abruptly. Daniel would be attending the opening ceremony, a fact that would have seemed inconceivable 2 years earlier. Our divorce had been finalized 18 months ago, proceeding with a civility that surprised everyone who had witnessed the dramatic beginning of our separation. I spotted his car coming up the long driveway. He emerged looking relaxed in a sport coat and open-collared shirt, so different from the tightly wound man who had announced our divorce at the anniversary party. The irony wasn't lost on me. Only after our marriage ended had Daniel begun to find his way back to the person he had once been. "The place looks amazing," he said, approaching with genuine admiration. "Mother would have loved what you've done with it." "I think so too," I agreed, accepting his light kiss on the cheek. The easy affection of old friends rather than the awkward distance of bitter exes. "Thanks for coming today. It means a lot." In the months following our split, Daniel had undergone changes that surprised everyone who knew him, myself included. He had scaled back his hours at the firm, taking on fewer cases but investing more deeply in the ones he accepted. He had started teaching at the law school, something his father had always encouraged, but he had never made time for. And he had begun therapy, a step I would have once thought impossible for a man who prided himself on self-sufficiency. Our healing had happened separately, but with a strange synchronicity. As I built my foundation, expanded my business, and rediscovered parts of myself that had been submerged during our marriage, Daniel had been on his own journey of recognition and recalibration. Later, as I addressed the gathered crowd from a small podium set up on the lawn, I caught Daniel's eye in the audience. He nodded slightly, a gesture of acknowledgement and respect that meant more than any of the flattering speeches that followed. Eleanor Mitchell understood something profound about human resilience, I told the assembled guests. She knew that endings can become beginnings when we have the resources and support to reimagine our lives. This foundation honors her belief that we are never just one thing, never just a wife or partner, never just a professional or caregiver, never just our successes or our setbacks. As applause rippled through the audience, I felt the weight of Eleanor's letter in my memory. Her confidence in my strength, her recognition of what I might become if given the freedom to choose my own path. She had seen in me something I hadn't yet recognized in myself. After the ceremony, as twilight settled over the estate, and guests mingled with drinks on the terrace, Daniel found me near Eleanor's favorite rose bushes. She would be proud, he said quietly. Not just of the foundation, but of you, of who you've become. I smiled, acknowledging the truth in his words. She'd be proud of you too, Daniel. You've changed. We both have, he agreed. Maybe that's what she was hoping for, all along. As the foundation's opening celebration wound down, I found myself drawn to Eleanor's garden once more. The night had turned cool, stars emerging in the clear autumn sky above the estate that had become both my sanctuary and my purpose. Katie found me there, carrying 2 glasses of champagne. Hiding from your own success? She teased, settling beside me. Just taking it all in, I replied. It's been quite a path to get here. That's the understatement of the century, she said with a laugh. From public humiliation to pioneering philanthropist in 2 years. Not everyone could have made that journey, Caroline. I took a sip of champagne, considering her words. I had help, Eleanor's inheritance. Wasn't just about the money, Katie interrupted gently. Plenty of people receive unexpected windfalls and do nothing meaningful with them. This, she gestured toward the house, this came from you. She was right, though it had taken me months to recognize that truth. Eleanor's financial legacy had provided opportunity, but the choices I'd made, the foundation's mission, its programs, its very existence, those had emerged from my response to circumstances I hadn't chosen, but had ultimately shaped to my own purpose. You know what I've realized? I said, looking up at the stars. Sometimes it's the things we think we can't survive that ultimately reveal who we really are. Katie nodded, understanding immediately. The anniversary party. And everything that followed, I agreed. I would never have chosen that path. I would never have wished for that kind of pain or public humiliation. But without it, I might never have discovered certain truths about myself, about my resilience, my capacity for reinvention, my ability to find meaning beyond the identity I had built as Daniel's wife. There's a strange alchemy in devastation, I continued. The very experiences that break us open can also create space for something new to emerge. Not immediately, grief and healing demand their time, but eventually, if we're willing to remain open to possibility. In the distance, I could see Daniel chatting with lingering guests, his posture more relaxed than it had been during our final years together. We had both found our way to better versions of ourselves, though we had needed to lose each other to do so. I used to think that happiness was about achieving certainty, I said finally. The right husband, the right home, the right social circle, all. The pieces arranged perfectly and permanently. But that kind of certainty is an illusion. Nothing is permanent. Nothing is guaranteed. That sounds terrifying, Katie observed. It was at first, I admitted. When Daniel announced our divorce at the party, it felt like the ground had disappeared beneath my feet. Everything I thought was solid turned out to be vapor. But eventually, I realized that what felt like falling was actually flying. Terrifying. Yes, but also exhilarating once I stopped fighting it. As Katie and I reached the front steps, I paused for one last look at the estate illuminated by moonlight. No longer a symbol of what I had lost, but a testament to what I had found in the aftermath of loss. The path forward wasn't about forgetting the past, or even fully healing from it, but about incorporating it into a larger, richer narrative that continued to unfold in ways I could never have anticipated. That was the paradox at the heart of profound life transitions. What appears to be an ending often contains within it the seeds of a beginning more authentic and meaningful than what came before. Not because the pain wasn't real, not because the loss wasn't significant, but because human resilience, when tested, reveals depths of possibility previously unimagined. My husband had announced our divorce at our anniversary party, using what should have been a celebration of connection to sever our bond in the most public way possible. The will reading had indeed changed everything, not by providing an easy solution, but by offering a mirror in which I could finally see myself clearly, perhaps for the first time. And in that recognition lay the most powerful transformation of all. Up next, you've got 2 more standout stories right on your screen. If this one hit the mark, you won't want to pass these up. Just click and check them out. And don't forget to subscribe and turn on the notification bell so you don't miss any upload from us.